Hi, today I want to talk about a court case that was in Crown Court in the 1990s. Involved a 46-year-old man, a family man, and he had three sons. They were aged 21, 20 and 16. So his offence was theft by six thefts he committed between the years of 1992 and 1997, and they were Insolvency Act offences. So basically what happened was he applied to be made bankrupt in 1998, and when his bankruptcy was investigated, it was discovered that he had applied to be made bankrupt because of gambling debts. So over the 4 to 5 year period, he'd managed to obtain credit cards and a loan by falsely claiming that he was in employment. And his combined debts to the various financial institutions amounted to £45,000. So meanwhile, over that period, he was attending two casinos almost daily, spending £200 to £300 per day. So he says he was introduced to gambling by his brother-in-law in the early 1980s, and towards the end of the 1980s, he had to stop working. He used to work. He had experience. I'll talk about his employment experience, but at the time in the mid to late 1980s, he's working as a taxi driver, and he had to stop because he had a condition called eye glaucoma, beginnings of glaucoma, which meant that his eyesight wasn't sufficiently good to have the taxi license, and it particularly affected his ability to see at night time. And in the 1990s, he became clinically depressed, and that coincided with him gambling even more. And he was also conned. He was a victim, really, because he was conned by a fellow gambler who outwardly appeared to be a very successful businessman in the motor car trade. And the man encouraged him to invest a substantial amount of money into a venture. And what Mr. K did, I call him Mr. Sid K, although it's not his real name. Sid invested in this man's venture and never saw any return and never got the money back. And the money he invested were his inheritance from his dad, So basically he cashed up some of his dad's property and things like that, and it had all frittered away on this venture, and he'd been conned, really. So sadly, to try and recoup the loss, he even increased his betting even more. And then he got some flyers mail shots in the post, inviting him to apply for a gold credit card. And he applied for a number of credit cards, and he falsely put that he was earning when he was in fact unemployed. So he lied on the form. So that in itself was, he got money on false pretenses, the credit cards, and that essentially is his offence. And he run up debts of £45,000 when he clearly couldn't repay it. And it's quite sad, isn't it, really? And he's a guy with very, very low self-esteem, and his kind of life story was he did okay at school, but his education was cut short by his father's passing away, who died, and he couldn't. His family were hoping that he'd be able to study dentistry, but he says he couldn't afford it. So he did various factory jobs, and then became a taxi driver in the 1980s. He often used to work late into the night, and had to deal with very abusive drunk clientele and things like that. He seemed really, really genuinely sorry for his offence, and really embarrassed and quite worried, really, because his wife is quite poorly and on disability benefits, and he felt embarrassed about what a bad example he was setting his sons, really. And gambling wasn't really something part of his culture at all. Many of his peers really had a very poor view of gambling and didn't really get involved in it, and so on. So there was a short medical report from his GPs confirming that he had been diagnosed as clinically depressed, and that he'd been seeing a consultant psychiatrist who prescribed him with lithium, and that he had glaucoma. His sons, the eldest was at university, the second one doing a business studies course at college, and the youngest is doing his JCSEs. Feels really embarrassed. I felt this guy was very low risk to the public, and that prison really should be used for people who are high risk to the public. Seemed really motivated, and I proposed really that he really needed to really address a number of issues, really, but to devise strategies to stop him gambling and overcoming his gambling addiction. And he needs to really, I felt, take up new positive activities and get a different view of life. So, like new hobbies, new studies he could study, and really boost himself. And I thought he's capable of doing a course, at college. And I felt that this would help him get a new vision of life and perhaps boost his self-esteem. And at the time, there was a sort of cognitive program that we did. It was called Think First. And I thought that would help him, assist him to adopt a new lifestyle and to think through strategies. And we were going to refer him to the Gamblers Anonymous group and get him to attend that. And really to address his low self-esteem. Now, I didn't make note of what happened to him, but I think he got sent to jail, which to me didn't really serve any particular purpose, really, apart from punishing him. And I think possibly the large amount of money was why he got sent to jail. But probably, I suspect he came out even more damaged than he went in. And I only hope his gambling stopped when he came out completely. But gambling is a very, very difficult thing. And I personally would like to see probation adopt a more hands-on approach with gambling, and perhaps with the help of psychologists to develop a one-to-one program based for people with gambling. But it's similar to other addictions in a way, but gambling is different because it's like an invisible. You can't tell. And often it's very done in isolation, it's very secretive. It's become even more accessible now online, and this is really worrying. And often people gamble to in the hope of paying off the money. And often the gambling companies offer free gifts and incentives to gamble more, which is bad. And sometimes people are addicted, not necessarily to get the money, but for the excitement and the thrill. Often they've got very poor impulse control, and they want to gamble when they're feeling depressed and that they have very low self-esteem. And often gambling is a possible way out of a life just full of negativity. And I think that is the crux of it very often. So there seems to be a lack of pleasure in life of other sources, and the only pleasure they're getting is from the potentially winning a lot of money or from the gambling, which is really, really sad. And often people tell porkies, they lie to cover up what they're doing, and it can come as a complete shock, So when I was brought up, actually, my dad was really worried about addictions, and he really, I don't know whether I think some of his work colleagues, he'd come across people with various addiction problems. One of his colleagues had a very serious drink problem, and my dad used to talk about that addiction can be terrible, and when you're hooked and addicted, it's very, very hard to get over an addiction. And he said, be very careful. And I remember one day we were at a hotel, and they had these old-fashioned one-armed bandits, and they all looked very exciting with the colours and the wheels. And he said, look at that lady. She's been on there for hours pulling the thing. And she's pulling it, she's wearing a glove because she's probably got blisters on her hand because she just keeps pulling the thing. And he'd say, well, gambling is a mug's game because the odds are always stashed towards the machine or towards the bookies or to whoever's doing the gambling. And how it functions, he said, is they let you win a little bit of money in the hope that you're going to carry on playing. And as you keep playing, they will repay you 30%, but they'll take 70% on average. So when you're putting your pound in, you might get a win occasionally, but it's like 30% of all the money going in, you see, but it's false because 70% of the money going in, it's keeping. And there's a lot of taxes made out of gambling as well. So, and I wonder, in my time, I don't think we did enough for gamblers. And I think we didn't really know what to do. But I think addiction counsellors can work with gamblers, and people are addicted, can be addicted to different things, and you can move from one addiction to the other. But I think very often is this underlying negativity, negative view of the world, depression and stress and things like that, all associated with addictions, and particularly with the gambling one. And I think if we could devise a one-to-one program, and I think you could even perhaps consider having a lie detector test with it, polygraph test, because they've been really effective, the polygraph test with sex offenders, for example. And, I think Mr. K would have been better served by a really good probation order with a polygraph test and a good cognitive program, and I think it's got to be devised by psychologists to help him overcome his addiction. And for me, that I felt strongly was his low self-esteem really needed addressing, and he needs to have a better view of life and find out different things, do new, interesting things, go for a walk, go and discover nature, go and study something at college, do a new hobby. He really needed to get a new life, really. And I think that was his underlying problem. And just sending him to jail made his life even more miserable. you know. Probably put him off offending for sure, but didn't really serve much positive purpose apart from setting an example. The other thought I had at the time was it seemed really easy for him to apply for 6 different credit cards, and I wonder what sort of checks they'd done on him, because really, if they'd been a bit more thorough, they would have uncovered his debts and things, or they would have found, they took it on his word that he was working. But I wonder what sort of checks do banks do when they lend people money, you know? So hopefully that kind of thing's improved. But I think gambling over the years has become easier and easier, and I don't like seeing these gambling adverts all over the place and football teams sponsoring gambling, and tricky. Anyway, if you have ideas or suggestions for dealing with gambling, or think ideas for what probation can do, for me, part of it is education. I mean, my dad made it really, really clear to me. And as a result, you know, I've never been in a bookies. I've never gambled, really, because the way my dad spoke to me really made me frightened of gambling. You know, I might have put a name down on the Grand National and the office sweepstake or something, but I've never, ever gambled on a fruit machine or gambled on horses, because my dad really put me off when I was growing up as a young, 14-year-old. He really put me off, and alcohol too. You know, he made me very wary of alcohol addiction as well. When I heard about one of his old friends, and I met him, and it wasn't very pretty seeing this alcoholic. So those life lessons, and I wonder whether at school and as we grow up, we need to know more about gambling. But certainly, I have respect for cultures where there is no gambling really, because, like my dad said, the only winners in gambling is the bookies really. And we even knew a family as I was growing up at bookies, and they used to be shoveling money in a safe that they had at home, and it felt a bit like they were a criminal family, almost shoving money into their safe at night. So I suppose they used to do it in cash in those days. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Do come forwards with your ideas to solve gambling. I hope I've covered them all, but I think probation could raise its game in dealing with gambling, and do let me know what you think. Anyway, all the very best now, and thanks for staying with me till the end of this video. All the best now. Bye-bye.